Georgie Smallwood has scaled N26, then mobility across 520 cities, and is now transforming a 25-year-old consumer brand through public market scrutiny as a CPTO at Moonpig. The through line is always the same. Take something working, make it structurally resilient. And what I admire about her is that she holds full accountability across product engineering and data, and has done it at a pace most leaders only read about. She is one of my personal role models for many, many years. So, Georgie, welcome to Product Org Unmasked.
Steph, thanks so much for having me here. It's great. It's always lovely to chat with you.
I'm so impressed by your CV and all the things you've been doing. Give me a little bit of background of where did you start? Where are you today?
Yeah, I know. This is where the stories become longer the older that you get.
Okay.
So sometimes I want to shorten it so it makes me sound younger.
Start with the most interesting fact that I found about you, which is unusual. You studied history and sociology, not computer science, not business, and still you ended up in product. Maybe let's start there.
That's a good place to start, because actually, on reflection, it is a really big part of how I think about product and building products and building companies. So I think, I went to uni. I did a double major in Australian history and sociology. And what history does is it means that you are looking back at the patterns and behaviors of society over hundreds and thousands of years. There's a standard joke when I talk to people in Europe or the Northern Hemisphere about studying Australian history that it must have been really easy because it's really short. And I was like, well, it didn't. The academic part didn't start just when Western society discovered Australia. It's actually 40,000 years of, incredible history around written down stories and languages and music and art. And of course, the very small last couple of hundred years where white civilization arrived on Australian shores. But what is great about history is you get to look at things across a very large section of time. And the reason I think history is so important in what we do, but also just in general, is you see the same patterns of behaviors being made over and over and over again. And actually, if you have an appreciation and an understanding of history, you can take those learnings and think about how you can apply them into the future so that potentially you can make different mistakes. So for instance, if we think about the AI evolution or revolution that we feel like we're in at the moment, this is not a new thing, right? There are multiple times across history where things have fundamentally changed, and it has felt like a seismic shift in the way that society operates, behaves. There's the Industrial Revolution, there's the introduction of the internet, and now we're sitting here with AI. And if you speak to people who were working when the internet was discovered or when the iPhone was created, that there was the same rhetoric around those different things. And so history is a really good way to check yourself. Sociology is also really important, and my parents, I think, would be like, how would you use that degree? But actually, the study of society is brilliant for building companies and teams and organizations, because humans are fascinating things, and employees and team members are humans, and you need to be able to understand their drivers, their hopes, their dreams, what's important to them if you want to be able to motivate, to empower, to drive people towards their best work. So yeah, I think but starting my kind of professional career with a background in history and sociology has been really key. And it also helps me. It means that had I started in computer engineering or in business, I may have taken more of an academic approach to how to build things, whereas I very much to this day take a human systems pattern approach to building teams and products.
Wow. I can imagine this is especially important in today's time where everyone's using AI to remove the human from the loop. that
Yeah,
this
for sure.
human lens is just important.
It's really important. But what's really interesting is where what AI is really good at is finding systems and patterns in the history only, right? But you need to be able to apply a human lens over the top of that to be able to use it effectively. Otherwise, you're just going to repeat. So that's what I meant by before, where if AI looks at history, it just does the same things. It assumes it was correct and then applies that to the future, whereas a human looking at history can take learnings and biases of their own making into those patterns and then apply that into maybe a different way of approaching things in the future.
And would you say removing the biases is an advantage or a disadvantage?
I think removing the biases is probably, from my point of view, there are some elements where biases are bad in society, but biases are human by their very nature. I think we're living in a time at the moment where biases are very extreme, but I'm sure if you look back through history, you'll find that there are multiple points where biases have become more extreme. But no, I think biases are good. I think they're good. I think they only are helpful, though, if you can debate them once they're out and you can talk about them and understand where they're coming from and then make a decision from that discussion rather than make a decision from the bias.
Now, studying history and sociology and then moving into product is not the most obvious choice. But now, on top of that, you're not just CPO, meanwhile, you're CPTO, which means you're owning the engineering part of the role as well. This is completely crazy from an outside perspective. Tell me how did you get into that role and how can I envision it?
Yeah, so this is my third executive role. So my previous two exec roles were CPO roles. As we know, a lot of your audience will be CPOs or aiming to be CPOs. I think the interesting thing about the chief product officer role is the scope of it is almost different in every company that you go to. So my first CPO role was at N26 and I owned product and design. I built research into it. We added a bit of product marketing towards the end. We built out product ops, but that probably sits in product. When I went to TIA, I owned those things. I also owned customer support, and I acquired marketing towards the end. I owned pricing at TIA. I didn't own it at N20. And now that I'm at Moonpig, I have a much broader scope. But the CPO role of it, that can change depending on the company that you're in. So I guess what I'm saying is it's not unusual for me to have scopes in different roles. This is just a very different scope and clear from the beginning that engineering and data would be under my remit, and I needed to think about it from the very beginning as part of how I approached the job. I think, how did I get there? So it also matters what the company needs at the time. So Moonpig was coming out of quite a heavy replatforming phase, where there was a lot of architecture rebuilding, a move to serverless, not a lot of growth focus from the technology platform side of things. And they were looking for a leader who could leverage that investment. So they were looking for a CPTO with a capital P. You'll often find people talk about CPTO either with a capital P or a capital T. I'm a capital P. But someone who had experience and an understanding of what's required to run a technology organization and data organization. So I had run engineering a couple of times through my CPO roles during interim periods without a CTO, but I'd never had full responsibility for it. So this was someone taking a bet on me that I would be able to take those leadership skills across technology and data.
My highlight this week is that you are the third person in a CPTO role this week. I'm talking to and recording a podcast episode with, and you are the third female person this week, which I totally love because I was convinced that the CPTO role will be a role mainly held by men. Now you're the third woman. All other podcast guests told me that they do have a healthy tension with themselves now. Almost every single day, they have to hold themselves back or they have to really argue against themselves every single day. Tell me about your day-to-day.
Yeah, I call it Jekyll-and-Hyde. This is where things like Claude or ChatGPT come in really handy. You'll often find if you come to my house, I will be having a conversation with the LLM and asking it to challenge me, because it's literally sometimes like, we need to build this thing. It needs to grow. We're behind on revenue. We're going to do this. Like, you can't make that. You keep hacking things into the client. You can't do that. We don't even have the data to make that happen. Like, it's really kind of trippy in that respect. Like, you just kind of, you learn to argue with yourself, and you have to, because there are so many great things about this role, right? It is fast, right? Like, all those things that as a CPO or a CTO or a chief data officer, you think, oh, if only I could make the decision, we could get there a lot faster. You do, right? You do get there a lot faster. Maybe too fast if you only realize the speed element of it. And so one of the things that is really important is that there's a real risk that you create frustration in the org because they don't understand how a decision got made. Because even though it can be quite slow and clunky to align a CPO, a CTO, a chief data officer on a decision. And it's great that I can kind of have that argument in my own head. It can happen. We all have the same information. The three of us all have the same information. We all have the same biases. We're all responsible for the same thing in the end.
You like each other.
We like each other most of the time. But the benefit in having to align across those people, real humans, is that it gives people time to come on the journey of the decision. So there are pros and cons. And one of the things that I have to be really cognizant of is that I don't just have that conversation in my head. I have to extrapolate it out somehow so that people can come on the information journey with me. And that's quite hard sometimes, because sometimes I don't realize the information that maybe I haven't shared that led me to a decision. Also, I shouldn't be taking all the decisions. So the other thing is, because it's so easy to make all the decisions, you could really disempower your organization. So you need to be really quite aware of that too.
Well, okay, that's super insightful, because it means you already have to share a lot of information. You have to talk about vision and strategy. You have to transform your organization. You have to up-level them so they are ready for the age of AI. Now you also have to share this level of detail with different departments. Engineering speaks a different language than product, than design. What's your approach?
I don't know if there's a secret sauce, and I don't know if the way I do it is the right way. There's always ways that you could do things better. I think the other thing is, you need to find ways that you can do it, right? So there might be some perfect way of communicating all of this stuff, but you also need to be comfortable with it. It needs to feel natural to you, or we won't do it all the time. So I have what I call the weekly wrap, and every week I record a video of myself talking to this, pretty much. And it's every Friday, and I made a commitment when I joined Moonpig. I made a quite loud commitment saying every single Friday you'll get a weekly wrap from me. It will talk about what I've done this week, what I've heard, what I've seen. Sometimes I will tell you a little bit about some kind of brain fart that's running around my head, and I just want to noodle it out with you and let you know what I'm thinking about. So sometimes they're 4 minutes, sometimes they're 12 minutes. That goes up on the Product Data and Tech Slack channel. There's a transcript if people want to read it, and they can consume it whenever they want. For me, it's not like a publishing of information, as in you need to know this, 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 and this. It's just more, this is what I'm thinking about. This is what's worrying me. This is what I thought was really awesome this week, so that the organization gets a feel for those conversations that happen in my head. And also, the other part about being CPTO is that you do have a really broad scope, and there are lots of, as you say, there's lots of job families in that scope. And so getting the feedback, you can't tailor everything for everyone. And so getting the feedback on kind of one form of communication, one channel is quite good. And so I'll go to the tech leadership team or principals meeting, and I'll say, like, what did you think about that? Or product managers. I mean, I'm by background, I sit in the product camp. And so I feel like organically it might work for them, but sometimes it doesn't as well. Like it's interesting. Like you say, I didn't do computer science, and I don't have a traditional technical background, but to some extent, there's a really great book, I think it's called Rise by Patty someone or other, and she talks about how being a great leader and manager of areas that you don't know necessarily all of the details about. And sometimes I think perhaps the technology teams and the data teams might think I'm a better manager than the product teams, because I have opinions on the product side. And I can't really have opinions on the fulfillment platform architecture, right? But I do need to figure out what questions I need to ask to make sure that it's solid. You need to figure out how to get an understanding that things are traveling well, the quality is there, the throughput is there, but you can't do it with any of your own inherent biases because you don't have any.
So you have to be more open-minded and more curious towards other disciplines than you have to be with product just because you walked in the shoes for years.
Yeah. Yeah.
Interesting. Now, you're transforming the organization. You're leading 16 product teams. Now AI comes on top of everything. How do you run your product organization in crazy times like these?
I think, to be honest, not differently. And that might be different people, I think, will answer this question differently. But as far as I'm concerned, we should always be transforming. Moonpig is a FTSE 250. It's a publicly listed company. It's been around for 20 years. There's a real risk that it could fall into that camp of like old school retail-esque e-commerce. It doesn't. So one of the great things about Moonpig is, like, we don't have a transformation team or a big project leadership. Like, that's not how we do things. We try and build agility, not agile, agility into our operating model. Right? So where's the flex? How can we change? Now, that's not to say that any of this is easy, but the core premises of change and humans and their ability to absorb change, to change with technology or environment and things like that, they're all the same, right? It kind of relates back to trust, right? So I don't know if you know, it seems a bit gimmicky and a bit consulting, but it's one thing that I found works in so many different scenarios. Is called the trust equation. So the trust equation is essentially that trust equals credibility, reliability, and intimacy over self-orientation. Over, like, not more than, but like over self-orientation. And change needs trust, right? So if, let's take AI and the evolution that technology orgs in particular, or organizations that rely on technology, are going through with AI. Credibility is really important, right? Making sure that your intentions are right? If an organization feels that leadership is pushing an agenda for a reason that they're not telling them about, you will not change. You will drag kicking and screaming. Intimacy is really important, right? Understanding where people are coming from, all the different opinions, all of them are important. The ones that are like, yes, let's go, I want to try stuff, and the ones that are like, I don't think this is a thing. I don't know what's going on. You're all nuts. We're going to wait 5 years and it's going to be this blip in the ocean, and you will have sacrificed all of your personal information and will be in a hellhole because of it. You need to listen to all of those opinions because all of them have some validity in them, right? And so intimacy is important there. Credibility, reliability, right? So are you doing what you say you're going to do, right? So if you say, oh, we're going to put these tools on, it's about learning, is it? Like, and how are you showing that it is about learning, right? Like, are you kind of exposing demos? Are you getting people to share insights? And so the trust is really important. And then if you think about self-orientation and you think about, are you giving people a path, right, to do this? And are you working with people to say, right, how do we get there? What is it? How do we build this road together? Because the other thing about all this, the theme here in being CPTO and making fast decisions, but them not necessarily landing because, people come on the journey. AI, right? And the trust equation of leadership, but also with a new technology and change. It's like you can go there really fast, but is that the goal? Is the goal to get there first, or is the goal to get there is the goal to use any new technology, AI being one of them, to increase the value to the customer, increase the value of the organization? What are you trying to do? And I think that's an important thing to understand, because AI is clearly a race. We're being rammed information down our throats every time you open LinkedIn or Instagram or TechCrunch or Harvard Business Review or something. It's always, how fast are you going? But the question is, what are you getting from it? And you need to be able, and I think the trust equation helps to keep you honest there, because if you truly believe that trust is what everyone needs to move forward on pretty much anything, then you can kind of make your plans based on that. And the outputs, or what you are saying, we're going to change, we're going to do this, they can be adjusted, right? Like you can change your KPI, you can change your, we expect, some companies are saying we expect this much code to be created, whatever works for you. You can change all those things. What you can't change is your intent. And so I think with any kind of change, particularly with AI transformation, technology transformation, we should talk about what we're trying to achieve more than the things that we put in place to achieve them, right? Because if the intent is right, then everything else we can adjust as we go.
Yeah. Oh, this is a really good concept. The trust equation, I'm sure, is a good basic value for organizations to also make sure that everyone is able to come along that quite challenging journey. At the same time, many of the things you're describing, not all of that is within your circle of control. I'm sure you can build trust with your teams and you can build credibility with your teams. And maybe being in that CPTO role makes it even a little bit easier because you have no friction with your CTO, you have no friction with the chief data officer. It's all you. So if you've built credibility, there's a large proportion of the teams that already built credibility with you. So building trust is easier. But now the entire organization is a living system. There are all the other departments, and you also need to make sure you're aligned with them. How do you do that in your day-to-day life?
So that's the other part of the CPTO role that is different, is that you cannot spend the majority of your time in a functional leadership capacity. So I spend a company that I worked for, where we had a coach at the executive team, and she did a really good job of articulating this, and it kind of stuck for me. As an executive, you have two roles, right? And if you have the C-level title, which not all executives have, but the C-level title makes it really clear, right? So as the Chief Product and Technology Officer, I have two roles, right? And it's not product and technology. It's the C role, which is chief, and then there's the functional role, right? And obviously my job is to represent and talk to the product and technology function, what we can do, what we can deliver, making sure that in that executive room, the product, technology, and data, we're not going to call me CPTD, is represented correctly and in a way that is the right way for the organization. You also have another job, which is you are the most senior leadership team of the organization. And the organization, as you say, is a system. And the PTD part of my job does not exist in isolation of the system. So thinking that is a real tension, right? Especially in organizations where you are not the product that is being sold. So for instance, at N26, we were a digital bank, right? So the product that I built with my teams, that was the product. At Moonpig, that is not the case, right? We are, I would call, a tech-enabled organization. technology enables the success of the business, but the technology is not what we are selling to our customers. And that's a really different role to have, because it's not frontline revenue, right? It's a step back from it. And the role that technology plays in that executive team is different. And so you need to be able to connect into the other functions in a much more integrated way, which I think is sometimes it's frustrating, having been in a company where, or having been in the role where you're the product. But I think if I ever went back to being the CPO or the CPTO at a company where the digital product was the customer's product, I would do it differently because of being in a company enablement situation, because there is some arrogance associated with being the product that is sold to customers that you need to leave behind when it's not.
Well, what would change if you, with that newly adopted mindset, would go back in a product first company?
I would work much more cross-functionally than I did back then. I think there probably was in my thinking, if we build it, they will come part. Whereas with Moonpig, working with marketing, building an integrated go-to-market plan, working with commercial on what the trade levers are for if we're launching a creative feature functionality, like we just launched Face Swap, right? So we could have spent the time building the Face Swap functionality and it would just be on the site somewhere. It wouldn't do anything. But building out the product with the card design range team, with the trade team on how we're going to promote this, with the marketing team on like how do we integrate the go-to-market into the product creation side of things, that could only have been beneficial in the digital product world. There's no way it would have been negative, but we didn't do it because we didn't think we needed to. So we probably missed out on a huge amount of opportunity just because of the way that we were operating.
And I think this nails it. And you said, I think some people might feel offended by you saying like we were quite arrogant, but I do see the same pattern in so many organizations. I feel like many product leaders try to convince their organization to become product led and to work the product way and to work outcome based. And so many product leaders burn out because they seem to fight windmills and do not fully understand why. And I wonder how much of what you're just saying explains it, because we're living in that product world, but we're not really collaborating the way we should, because we rather try to force other departments into our way of working instead of being open to how we have to work as an organization.
Yes, 100%, right? And there's two sides of it as well. So one side, to follow through on what you're saying, like we do try and force the organization into a product-led approach, right? Which language is important, right? It's like it's not supposed to be that the CPO or the product leadership is leading the organization. That's how it's supposed to be. And that's, I think, how we felt it was. So on one hand, you're leaving lots of opportunity on the table because of working that way. And on the other hand, the product leaders often, because of this way of working, feel an insane amount of responsibility for the number. And that can become quite toxic because it really does create a them and us mentality. It is really, really important that the organization creates value for the customer, and the product roadmap is one part of that value. But it's not the only part.
Why do we still believe it is?
I mean, like the romanticizing of operating models that happens is epic. And I get it, right? Like this is hard. So thinking that there's a way that makes it easier, that's written down or that's been proven, is very, very appealing. I know. I've fallen into the trap so many times in my career, so many times. There is not a perfect model that works for creating the maximum amount of value for an organization. And I think the sooner that we realize that if you read one book or one model, you have to read them all. At different companies, I've picked different things from my experience and put them together for the point in time and the problems that the company is facing at that point in time. And I've been at Moonpig for almost 3 years now, and there's been multiple times during that where we have needed different things. At the moment, I'm realizing that we were missing some very high level strategy because we have had a really clear corporate strategy for about 7-8 years. That's been around for a long time, and you need to refresh it. You need to rejuvenate it. You need to extend it, and you might need to transform a bit of it to make that longevity occur. We are doing that now, but there was a period of time in hindsight where we used process to close the gap between the extension of the longevity of the strategy and just being able to get things done. And now that we're really working on that top level strategy, vision, making sure that it is still true. Yes, there are some tweaks potentially that we need to make it clearer and to give us a lot more runway. All of a sudden, maybe we don't need all of that process. But we did at the time. So like you need to take bits and pieces, and it's an evolution, and it's not an evolution that just goes like this. It's kind of an evolution that goes like this. And, sometimes at some points in a year or a 3-year period, we might be absolutely living empowered teams. And at other points in that same time period, we might absolutely not be living empowered teams. But that doesn't mean that it's wrong. That means at that point in time, this is what we need to do to maximize the performance and the impact of what we need at the time.
Okay, well, you're falsifying one of my key hypotheses right now, but let me tell you what it is. My hypothesis is that in today's time, organizations need some kind of product operating model, at least something that they can explain to an AI agent so that parts of their operating model can be automated. Now, you're saying not ditch the product operating model, but make sure that you do have enough process for the moment. And sometimes it's more process, sometimes it's less process, but there is not the one product operating model.
But if you come back to the history and sociology beginning, right, there are some things that are always true. People need to know what's going on. People need to know the direction that we're going. They need to know the constraints that the company is facing into at any given point in time. And they need to know what we expect of them. That's an operating model. The inputs are always the same, but the outputs or the actions or the tasks that you're asking people to do or to complete or to administrate might be different at any given point in time. And that's also what I meant by like, you should always be transforming. If you go to a product org or a production technology and data org and you say, this is how we're going to do it, I promise you that's going to be incorrect because you're going to have to evolve, right? And so how do you think about what is the system and what's important to the system? And that will be also different depending on the company, depending on the stage, depending on the sector. In banking, very different to transport, very different to e-commerce, right? I mean, you look at my CV and some people are like, what are you doing? Which is fair. Like, whatever, it's interesting, I like it. But the core of what is needed, N26 went from 600,000 customers to 7 million in 2 years. We entered and exited markets like we were, changing our tops. Like it was mental. Moonpig is quite stable, right? Like we have our core markets, we're growing our international expansion markets, which is fantastic. But those two companies don't need different fundamental systems. We still need the right people for what we're trying to achieve at the time. We still need them to have clarity so they can use their expertise in the right way. They all still need those same operating model inputs. I think the challenge comes when you try to be really specific about the operating model, then you're going to have to do a target operating model update every 12 months or maybe even more often.
Also, you will get a lot of resistance from people if you try to force all of them to use exactly the same process and operating model every day in every project, in every initiative. This is going to fail because tech debt is different from bugs, from features, from innovation, from growth work. You can't anyways force one model.
No, you can't. But please don't, I don't think anyone should misunderstand, right? Having a system or an input-based operating model is also not easy, because as much as humans want clarity, they also want autonomy. And there is always going to be a tension between, it's really important for leadership to give an organization clarity on where we're going, what we're doing, what we expect. By its very nature of creating clarity, we take a path that some people won't agree with. There is no way, if you have no dissent, you are not deciding. But we don't want dissent. We don't want people to be unhappy. Hard calls, the more senior you get, the harder the calls you have to make every single day. Because if they're not hard, you're not making them.
And as you said earlier, you also have to keep everyone up to date, and you have to keep everyone up to date on a very detailed level of information. And when we're talking about product operating models and creating context, I think that is something where I do see a big advantage in this age of AI, because you can create context. You can make sure that your roadmap is not spread across 20 PowerPoint presentations and Excel sheets and tools, and that your latest strategy document has never been updated, because those are things that you can enrich by meeting recordings, by whatever Claude skills. There are options out there today to create a level of clarity that has never been there before. And that means that potentially we can also move towards getting teams more efficient, because we can create more clarity today. And that is something that I find super exciting.
Absolutely.
Yeah. I have one last question. What is something you believed 5 years ago that you have completely reversed on?
I think the biggest realization or eye-openingness that has happened to me as I've progressed in my career is always, from this point, I always thought this person had it easier. Always. Like I always did. And that you would have more ability to make the right decisions and you would have more say in things, which is probably true, but not in the way that I thought. And every time I move into an expanded role, and that doesn't necessarily have to be up, I've realized that everyone has a boss. Even chairman of the board has a boss. They're called analysts and VC investors, and they are, their own set of challenges. There are always constraints, and actually the more senior you get, the more constraints get exposed to you. And so I think the thing that I used to think was that it was going to get easier. It gets harder, but you have more perspective in that difficulty. And actually it's really exciting, because you have all of these pieces of information that you could pull on. I think the bit about leadership is that you have to pull that together into a decision that is clear and you can stand behind. And when people ask you why you made that decision, you can say, this is why I made that decision. Now, you also have to realize that not everyone is going to agree with you. So the bit I didn't realize was how much as a leader you have to back yourself, and you need to be able to have the confidence in yourself to take the decisions. And so that's the bit for me that I wish, but I don't know how there is any possibility of, because I think it's like trying to tell someone who doesn't have children what it's like to have children. Like, you need to live it, you need to go through it. But I think the important part is that it does get harder, but it's fun. The hardness is what's good about it. And you know that if it's hard and you're facing into it, that you probably are being the best leader that you can be.
Wow, it gets harder, but it's fun. Georgie, I learned a ton, like in every conversation with you. Thanks a million for taking the time. to be on my podcast.
Well, you're welcome. It's always great to chat. And I forgot that I did history and sociology. I'm going to go back and have a look at my stuff. There's probably some stuff I can use in my next strategy conversation.